Batman Beyond is the cooler, younger, more relatable Batman with the epic suit and the Gotham that makes your mouth water. As far as successors for the mantle of Batman go, Terry McGinnis is doing a pretty good job. Batman Beyond is a TV show set in the same universe as the rest of the DC animated universe, which includes shows like Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Justice League Unlimited, and Static Shock. The only difference being that it's set a good 40 years later. After the show and subsequent TV movie aired, we were gifted with several comic runs. The first two runs were show tie-ins, while the next 4 volumes were all individual stories of their own. And then the most recent comics, what I like to call the Neo runs, were very much their own stories. And in essentially every bit of Beyond media, the cowl of Batman falls on the shoulders of one 16-year-old Terry McGinnis, and honestly, who else could it be?
What are you doing? Fighting dirty. The real Batman would never... Told you didn't know me.
Now, that header has two meanings that are both true, but I'll be touching on one and not really worrying about the other. This is because Epilogue was kind of stupid from like a thematic point of view, and also because talking about Epilogue is like a total cop-out. Terry McGinnis, as a character, was originally drawn up to be Batman. That was the only role he was meant to fill. And that isn't to say this is all Terry is. He's got a lot more to him. Don't even worry about it. But that still doesn't change that Terry's inception was to be Batman, specifically a Batman to cater to an audience that would directly relate to him. For a long time, relating to Batman was as a power fantasy. You wanted to be the super cool buff hero with all these girls and all this money. That's not Terry. I mean, in some ways he kind of is. A natural fighter who has two different girlfriends over the course of the series. I love you, Dana. I love you, Melanie. How could they ever pit two bad bitches against each other? Instead, we get a Batman for the average person to relate to. He's not doing the best in school, he has troubles with his friends and his mom, and has a little brother who he's annoyed by just as much as he loves. He's honestly much more grounded in comparison to other Batman characters. You can see yourself in Terry. And even more, since Terry is a protege to Bruce's mentor, we get a kind of way to get a Watson to Bruce's Sherlock. We see a bit more of who Bruce is because of his relationship with Terry. And through the entire show and a good portion of the comics, Terry's still got a lot to learn. So we get to see him learn how to be a detective on his own, how to go undercover when rushing in as Batman isn't going to do him any good. We see him develop from an angry kid out to avenge his father to a real hero. We get to see him come to terms with this himself. We also see him shape Batman into something completely his own. He takes the Bruce Wayne template and he turns it around until he sees himself reflected back to him in the suit. One of my favorite episodes of the show isn't the most funny or the most sound, but to me it's always stood out. Season 2, Episode 12, Babel. In this episode, Shriek has essentially held the city to a ransom. He will cause infinite chaos, destruction, and death, all unless he can claim the life of one man. Batman. Terry looks this straight in the face. Barbara Gordon offers him a way that they can avoid giving up his life for the cities. Terry gets to the police station to meet her. At the last second, he walks away. He returns to the Batcave. Even after Bruce and Max both tell him that he doesn't owe the city any more than he's already given it, even after he's seen what the city he's protected thinks of this, he puts on the batsuit and goes to meet Shriek. Later, when asked by Bruce what he would have done had his plan not worked, he doesn't answer.
Tell me, what if you hadn't figured out how Shriek was using the towers? Would you have handed yourself over to him at midnight?
In case you haven't noticed, we've got a suit to repair here.
But you know what he would have said. He would die for Gotham City. He didn't care what it had done for him in exchange for everything he did for it. At only 16, he would lay down his life for the cold, unfeeling city that had raised him. And this episode really stood out to me because, for the most part, Batman Beyond is a pretty fun show with a lot more comedy than dramatic moments like this. Terry more often than not quips with his supervillains. He laughs and he smiles and he messes around. He's nowhere near as serious as Bruce was while he was in the role. Despite the suit making him scarier, he isn't. He's pretty lighthearted. So this moment in the show just hit, made you realize just how committed to the suit and Gotham Terry had become. I think another example of just how Batman Terry can be was in the Static Shock time travel crossover taking place in Static Shock, Season 4, Episode 1. In this episode, he's suddenly devoid of all jokes. He's serious about the mission. He isn't happy when Static drifts from the goal and the instructions set for the two of them. The change in his character from the punk kid we're used to is stark, and this isn't because a different writer was taking on Terry in this episode. No, it was one of the regular writers on Batman Beyond, Stan Berkowitz. You wouldn't think it, but Terry knows how to take things seriously when the time calls for it. And maybe this time wasn't exactly something that called for it, but it showed that Terry knew how to put up a front of professionalism in front of others, and in front of those he isn't used to. He knows when he has to project Batman instead of Terry McGinnis. He does a lot of the same when he first meets the Justice League, but by the time he's in the comics with them, he's used to them, so he's back to the kid we know and love. And the same with when he's with them in the Justice League time travel episode. He's used to his team, so he messes around when he's with them. Another thing about Terry that I feel is pretty central to understanding his character is his guilt. He's guilty about a lot of things, about getting in trouble so much when he was younger, about his criminal past, about not being able to save his dad. If he'd been smarter, if he hadn't messed up with the wrong crowd, if he'd just been there. And he shows his guilt in a myriad of ways. The biggest one of these, of course, being the fact he's the goddamn Batman. He says it himself. This is the way he feels that he's redeeming the sins of his past and being a worthwhile human being. This is his reckoning, his judgment. He stops the same kind of person that he used to be from being worse. One of the biggest foes that he faces, the Jokers, aren't all that far off from who he was before the cowl, just some punk goon who does this for the sake of a little bit of recognition and people who care about him. He did it for the friends he had back then. And when he sees one of those friends from back then again, he does his best to help them move forward just like he did. He tries to offer Big Time Charlie a way out, a way to live a normal life after prison. It gets him a pretty decent job, and even after his trust is betrayed, he still feels bad for his old best friend. The fact that Terry was never able to save his father, and the way he channels this into Batman feels a lot like the way Bruce did. Once he understands the suit he's wearing, he wants to do his best to make sure that no one goes through what he did. That's a central tenet to Batman that every successor has to offer, just a pure want for a better world. But the world isn't always good to Batman.
Surprised to see me? A little. I'm more surprised that I lived so long.
Batman, Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne, Batman. Or have you met?
Not now!
Before I get into this, quick interlude to ask you to subscribe to my channel for more, like this video if you're enjoying it so far, and comment down below your thoughts. And stick around to the end of the video, maybe. That'd be kinda cool. Cool? Back to the actual video. It's pretty hard to talk about Terry and his place as Batman without first talking about the man whose boots Terry had to fill. This, of course, being Bruce Wayne. The myth, the legend, the icon. There's countless starts to the Batman story. We get a new one essentially every month. But ends are far rarer. We don't see too many of those, and they typically aren't the best endings for Bruce. Probably because no one cares to see Bruce Wayne die peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family with somebody, having taken on Batman already and having solidly committed to it. Because let's be honest, you don't expect a happy ending from Batman. So instead, we get a lot of not especially fun old Batman stories. Your Kingdom Comes and your Batman Year 100s. But those are pretty detached from the way the comics and the world of Batman tends to be. In terms of a realistic evolution, I'd say this is probably the worst way for Bruce Wayne to go out. And I'll get to his actual death soon enough, but you can't ignore all that came before his death, namely just how fucking lonely he is. Prior to Terry showing up, it's more than implied that his only socialization he'd had for years being his dog. He was fully expecting to live out the last of his days completely alone. He knows he's not going to be succeeded by anyone. Batman is going to die with him. He hasn't spoken to Dick in years, and we don't see him in the entirety of the show, only seeing him in the comics. According to the show lore, he left because of the whole Bruce Timm, Bruce Babs nonsense, but I hate that. Regardless, Dick leaves, and it takes him decades to talk to Bruce again. He only does this after Terry shows up. Barbara quits being Batgirl, and she becomes the police commissioner. Bruce doesn't seem to expect to see her again, ever, and the only reason he does is because she, as commissioner, feels it's her duty to get involved when there's a new Batman in town, and even then, they mostly talk about Terry and Batman. Then there's Tim Drake, who, for one thing, is essentially a mix of Tim and Jason, but is also very notably missing from the narrative, and it's easy to extrapolate that he left Gotham and Bruce the minute he turned 18. In the TV movie, Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker, it takes Tim turning into the Joker in order for Tim to talk to Bruce again. We don't really see him again, not in the show or the surrounding DCAU stuff or the comics. He's a civilian and a ghost story now. Damian is a bit of a different story, I'd say, mainly because at the time of the DCAU and all of the Batman Beyond stuff, Damian didn't exist, or at least not really. He kind of existed, but he wasn't Damian. The closest thing to Damian we get in the OG show is Ra's al Ghul essentially saying he's going to pretend to be Damian. But he does end up showing up pretty early in the 2016 Batman Beyond run, and what he shows us there is a bit more telling than the others. Once, Damian had been Batman. He had succeeded Bruce in the suit. After Bruce had been forced to quit, he called his son back to Gotham, and after a long time of having put away being a vigilante and Robin. Then, Damian uses this to take over the League of Assassins, and then he quits. Leaves the suit behind and doesn't even say goodbye. Bruce doesn't see him again until he comes to fight Terry. So, this leaves Bruce very, very alone. For decades, probably. He has absolutely no one. Over the years, he lost everyone. He started alone. He was fully ready to end it alone. It's a cynical way to look at it. The great Batman, left with no one but himself and a dog in a big old house that's haunted by the shell of a myth of a man. Until Terry comes along, that is. Note how when any of Bruce's sidekicks come back, it was always after Terry took up the suit. Terry managed to pull Bruce out of solitude, both by being there and forcing him to have someone there, and by allowing the others a sort of entry back into Bruce's life through him. Through the easy excuse that there was a new Batman in town. Terry saves Bruce from the loneliest death imaginable. He assures him he doesn't die alone. That doesn't change that this is a horrible world for Bruce before he comes along, and just as bad as an exit. Bruce isn't given the death that everyone hopes for, or even the one he hoped for. He doesn't go out quietly with his family, nor does he go out fighting in some kind of glorious battle. When Bruce Wayne dies, it's on the floor in front of the Batcomputer, killed by a foe he never even got to see. Killed by the city itself. I guess it's pretty easy to say that Bruce was killed by the Mentor death curse. Pretty straightforward. He mentors Terry on how to be Batman for a number of years, and then when Terry outgrows him and needs to move on with his life, he dies. Bruce dies to be the catalyst to push him even further. As he dies, he leaves Terry with the last advice he'll ever get from him that carries him through the next act of the story. By this point in the timeline and Bruce's arc, he's mostly focused on Terry, and so his death, like the death of many a mentor before and after, was to drive Terry's arc forward. And isn't that just a fucking bleak of a way for Batman to go out? To further someone else's story, he got the fucking Wayne treatment. The apple doesn't fall all too far from the tree. It is very hard to separate a character from the context of the setting they exist in. You can't talk about Luke Skywalker without talking about Star Wars, and just like this, you cannot talk about Terry McGinnis without talking about Gotham. Specifically, Neo-Gotham. And the thing about Neo-Gotham is that what looks like a simple setting very quickly changes the genre. Batman Beyond is, on the tin, classified as a superhero action sci-fi cyberpunk adventure. And while some of those don't add too much but like a little bit of a tone guide, there's two that make it unique, especially within the wider superhero genre, sci-fi and cyberpunk. And sci-fi is a very wide term. Cyberpunk, on the other hand, establishes a good few things about the show or comic you're witnessing. Cyberpunk is described by Britannica as a science fiction subgenre categorized by countercultural anti-heroes trapped in a dehumanized high-tech future. Neo-Gotham is pretty damn straightforward. You have this futuristic city, clearly inspired by East Asian big cities, that's ruled by corrupt corporations that seem to be able to get away with whatever they want while the rest of the city crumbles around them. You have the enhancements of human capability with things like splicing, and you have a perfect cyberpunk protagonist. Often, this genre has a pretty strong overlap with the film noir and its detectives. Typically, with cyberpunk, you get a few protagonist potentials. You have the noir-style detective, the hacker, and the angry punk. Honestly, Beyond gives us all three to some degree. Our detective is Bruce Wayne, and our hacker is Maxine, and our titular character who ties it all together is Terry. He's a troublemaker who hates the big corporations that rule his life. He spends the first season trying to take down Derek Powers, the kingpin of Gotham's ruling class. The very same ruling class that, following Bruce Wayne's death, he goes after even harder. Without having to worry about any kind of personal stake in Wayne Enterprises, Terry is prepared to be the hero of the people. But this setting doesn't only exist with the help of Terry. He doesn't make it what it is, and he isn't what makes the absence of the technology in some places so stark. The Gotham Deep is introduced to us in Batman Beyond, Neo-Gothic, and I gotta say, fucking hell. This book haunted my soul when I read it, and the Gotham Deep is definitely part of why. Let me explain. The Deep is essentially the Undercity. When Neo-Gotham was built, it did not replace what was there before. Instead, it simply built on top of it. This left, under it, a second city that never sees the sun. It goes down unknown depth, and even its inhabitants don't know how far down it goes. Gotham got the option of sprawl or grow tall. It chose to grow tall. Building after building, street after street, one on top of the other. Our vehicle for this new part of Gotham is Terry, who's never seen this place in his life, but he'd fit right in. If he smelled right, that is. The real character who understands and shows us the Deep is brand new. Catboy Kyle, a resident splicer who reminds Terry a lot of himself. He's a bit of a bastard, and he's initially distrustful, and he knows magic. Don't worry about that part. He's our perfect reflection of what the Deep is, distinct enough from the Gotham we've grown far too complacent in accepting. A mirror of our protagonist if he didn't have the support of those around him and a safety net to fall back on. Someone who knows something far older than anything he's lived through. Cursed. Despite the Deep being far closer to the Gotham we're used to in other media, when it shows up to and beyond, when we're so prepared for this high-stakes, high-tech nightmare, it shocks you. The contrast is stark. And Neo Gotham is a nightmare. One of the big things about cyberpunk is that it's commonly used as a vehicle for dystopia, because this place fucking sucks. At first glance, it looks like a great place to live, but not really, is it? Ruled by the invincible corrupt at the top of the heap, where the only hero to stand up to them is a 16-year-old boy. Countless acts of crime and violence break out on the streets. It's a horrible ending for the city, just as it's a horrible ending for its hero. But it isn't just Gotham that's not doing its best.
I think it's time your protege joined the Justice League.
The Justice League?
The Justice League is one of the fan-favorite aspects of the DC universe. Batman Beyond has a version of its own. I usually call it the Justice League Beyond for separation's sake, but a lot of the time they just call it Justice League Unlimited, which is confusing. It contains Superman, Static, Big Barda, Aquagirl, Green Lantern, and Warhawk. In the comics, we sometimes get a Flash. Oh yeah, and Batman, but he's a part-timer. And that's it. Now, it's not like I didn't say any names, or I said a small list, but that's it. That's all of the heroes of the DC animated universe in the 2040s. That's it. There is no one else. Heroes are few and far between, even as the world undoubtedly grows in populations, with projections for 2040 being over 9 billion. Yet there's not a comparatively large amount of heroes. People in this universe just don't do that anymore. No one is stepping up to the plate. And those who do have a lot of reason to. Superman, Barda, and Static were all heroes for a while before they appeared in Beyond. Supes and Static are old, and Barda just lives a long time. Then you have Green Lantern, who despite being an actual child, was chosen to be the Green Lantern by Oa. And you can't really turn down that responsibility. Aquagirl is the daughter of Aquaman, so it just makes sense for her to follow in his footsteps. Warhawk even more so. He had two hero parents, Hawkwoman and Green Lantern. From what we know, Terry's the first person to just start doing this out of nowhere in a long, long time. Earth 12 is an incredibly empty place for people like him by the time he enters the picture. And when it isn't entirely empty, it isn't entirely friendly either. When Batman Beyond first meets the Justice League, they are pretty openly antagonistic towards him. They don't trust him. They don't want him there. They don't think he has anything to show for himself or bring to the table they can't already. This world doesn't like its newcomers. If you're not already established and people don't know you, they don't want you. They'd rather you just sit yourself back down and go home. It's not an especially fun way to exist. It's awfully lonely to be a hero here.
You're a stubborn piece of work, you know that.
Just like my old man.
Terry isn't a very lonely guy at the start of it all. He has friends, he has a girlfriend, he has a mom and a dad and a little brother. And he likes this. Yeah, maybe he's got a few problems, but problems with being alone aren't included. He's surrounded by people all the time. And then there's an inciting incident. Terry's dad dies. Then Terry's still doing pretty okay for himself. He makes some new friends and gets even closer to a few he already had. And then Bruce dies, probably a decade later, and then Terry pushes away everyone he still has. He tells his mom and brother to get out of Gotham, not to come back. He tells the same thing to Dana, to Max, to all the people who matter to him. He even gives up Ace. He drives everyone away. He leaves no one still around him. He is all alone. He does exactly what Bruce did decades before him. He chased out everyone who cared about him and everyone he cared about because he thought it would protect them. And I guess it did, but it didn't do anything good for Terry either. He spends all of Neo Year by himself. When he does find someone to spend it with, they're not exactly human. They're not what he needs, and Beam Boonma isn't there for most of it either. He spends that year in a deep dark cave with nothing but the bats and without seeing the sun. He does what Bruce did. He has become Bruce in a way, but because Terry is naturally a very social person, it doesn't last for long. He refuses to let it, no matter how hard he tries to self-isolate like Batman. One of the biggest themes of Batman Beyond is loneliness. The other is much more straightforward. Legacy. What Bruce leaves behind him when he takes off the cowl and when he eventually meets his grave is not just the legacy of Batman. It's also the legacy of the loneliest man on Earth. He takes that loneliness that he was so prepared to take to the grave, and he doesn't take it there. Instead, he leaves it with the one man who survives it all. Terry. And so, he's left all alone. He's left with a lot of the same habits as Bruce. He's left with Bruce's voice in his ear even a whole year after he hears it for the last time. He's never going to escape the legacy of the man that came before him. Terry can try his very hardest, and even as the people who remember the Bat that used to be die, he will be stuck with the image of the original. No matter what he does, he is Batman. And so he has to be Bruce Wayne. He is Bruce's reflection. But because this is a legacy, this isn't a clone of what Batman is. Terry brings his own aspects to the cowl. He doesn't entirely become the man before him. He becomes better. He refuses to let the loneliness consume him. Even as impossible as he imagines this to be, he cannot leave himself alone. He finds others. He has to find others. And so he does. He has Gestalt, Beam, Kyle, and then he has the people he had all along. At the end of Neo-Gothic, he calls Dana for the first time in a long time. Before he descends into the deep, he calls his mother. Terry can try his best to be alone. He can try his best to be the same as the Batman that came before him, but he cannot succeed the way he was preceded. His predecessor will leave an undoubtable mark on his character, but it is not the end of his story. We will get more, and we will get more and more freedom from Bruce Wayne. He's the mentor, he's the image, he's the template. And as he's a template, there's still so much more to do.
Sorry, pal, but you're history.
So, in summary, I really like Batman Beyond, and I really like New Year and Neo-Gothic. Go read Batman Beyond New Year and Neo-Gothic. They're only 12 issues. Oh, come on. It will be so worth your time. Please. When I heard about that action figure coming out for Neo-Gothic, I'm telling you, I immediately hit pre-order. I got it pretty recently, or I will by the time this video published. I ordered it in, like, November, despite the fact it didn't ship until January. I really like this book. But yeah, as you might be able to notice, I finally got an actual microphone instead of just using my headphones. Yeah, and I also discovered that my headphones had worse audio quality than just doing nothing. So, and I only discovered this while I was doing an audio test on the microphone. The next few videos will probably have a lot better audio quality because this is the very first thing I am recording with the new microphone on the day I got it. But, you know, we're having fun with it. Yeah, subscribe if you liked the video, like, and comment down below with your own thoughts. I will see you next time. Until next time, listeners.